Well, first of all, thank you everybody for attending today on the Inspired Perspectives webinar series. Today's topic is how to budget and plan to enable strategic transformation. So just a brief background on me. My name is John Alt. I'm a principal in our technology consulting practice. I've been with Ed Bailey for about 14 of those 20 plus years of experience. I've worked in a whole variety of industries. I actually started in our advisory practice, helping people do plans, strategies, those types of things. Currently working in our data analytics practice. So again, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. By way of my background, I'm kind of a technology focused person. I know we have a lot of CPAs on the call today for their CPA credits, but I think I'm hopefully the kind of right balance of kind of business and technology for the topic that is at hand today. So just by way of an introduction, this is kind of our agenda for today, and we do have some time at the end for Q&A as well. But we're going to talk a little bit about what I would just say is sort of the link between your technology investments and your business strategies. If you think about how you're going to budget for this, I think it's important to understand that link and how to make it, how to establish the right investments, those types of things. Second thing, we're going to talk a little bit about, we've created this, I call it our digital maturity model. It's a common thing from sort of researchers in the technology world. Well, they'll kind of create think of it as like a continuum and where to plot yourself. I always think of this as establishing a baseline. So where are we at today? So when we understand where we need to make investments, I think it's nice to understand kind of the goal and where we're trying to go to. So think of it as kind of establishing that North Star. Where are we headed? What are we trying to achieve? Where are we trying to get to? The third topic is, I think, important context. So if I were on the other end of the webinar and I'm trying to understand, well, where am I going to invest? What am I going to do? I have 2 or 3 slides that just kind of highlight global trends in technology investment. There are a couple things that I think are really important there. I will say right up front, I don't think your goal should be to be average. So if you think about, well, what are others doing? I don't want to just go follow everybody else, but I think it is nice to look at some of the research that's out there to understand where are the sort of trends, where are people putting their dollars, both globally and within your industry. The next topic is, I've labeled it finding room in the budget for digital transformation. So if you think about what you spend today, this whole topic is about kind of understanding the push and pull or the balance between what I've labeled just your operational IT budget and strategic transformation or digital transformation. It's always a tough thing. So we have a few kind of, I'll call it tactics to apply there, a few things to try to help guide how to balance those two things. The last topic is kind of some content around the process for strategic technology budgeting. So what's a process you can go through to do some of that, I'll call it linking that we're going to cover here next, those types of things. And then again, we have some time for Q&A, and please use the Q&A feature in Zoom for that. And you can actually ask a question at any point during the time. I probably will answer them mostly at the end. So if you have a Q&A or question, please post it to the Q&A in Zoom, and we'll address them largely at the end. Amy's kind of monitoring if it's something we need to cover during the presentation as well. So with that, we're actually going to start off with what I would say is some important, I call it context. That says, okay, here's kind of where we're coming from with our content today. But this establishing the link that we talk about in this section, I would just say that organizations that do this well are disrupting entire industries. And there are really great examples. A couple of the videos here, I think, are going to give you some good context around that. I would also like to highlight that I would say that almost every industry is at risk. I do a lot of work in the healthcare field. I know we saw on the list of attendees, we have lots of people on the webinar today for various healthcare organizations. I think, not all that long ago, we thought this was one of those industries that was relatively immune from disruption. And I think post-COVID, some of those kind of things, nothing could be further from the truth if you really look at it. And in general, I'll say the market is screaming for some disruption in healthcare in terms of efficiency and outcomes, all kinds of things. So to kind of wrap that up, I think the general message is this: disrupt or be disrupted, right? So either you figure out a way to go invest in your business, or you're always going to be kind of chasing the next person that's disrupting you. So for that, I actually have 2 short videos that we're going to show and they're both really short, just a little bit over a minute, but I think they provide good context going into the presentation content. So the first one here is Amazon Care. So this is Amazon's take at kind of the future of healthcare. You can imagine what it looks like, but I wanted to play this short video to give you some examples.
Hey.
Is this for sure?
The best care is always by your side.
What's the matter?
There for you whenever you need it. Which is why we created Amazon Care. A healthcare experience built around you that cares for you and those you care for. Whether you need an answer to a question, someone to speak with face to face,
He's been complaining that his right ear has been hurting.
or visit you in person,
I'd like to send a mobile care nurse to take a look in that ear.
Amazon Care makes it easy for you to access the care you need.
Hi.
No appointments, no waiting rooms. Ready and available to provide in-person exams, testing, and treatments from your home or workplace.
That ear does look infected. Based on his symptoms, let's go ahead and get him started on antibiotics.
From delivering prescriptions to providing the follow-up information you need. With Amazon Care, care is always by your side, letting you focus on what matters most.
Just a couple of comments before we go to the next one. If you watch the video, you actually don't see it. I always thought you did. Now that I paid a little more attention. But what I envision here is kind of the Amazon Prime van in the background, right? So they show the nurse walking in with the backpack and all those kind of things. If you think about disruption in technology, Amazon comes at healthcare from I'm going to call it mobile first perspective. They're kind of targeting people that are much younger than me. I'll call it the younger generation that are comfortable doing all of this stuff on an app on a phone. So they interact. If you think of the efficiency that it brings to the system, it's quite profound. It's a very different deal. I mentioned I see the van kind of in the background, at least in my head, and I picture a small little pharmacy. I picture a little bit of a lab, maybe even some imaging stuff in the future. So if I'm in the healthcare delivery business, I'm looking at this saying, well, what does it matter? The reason this is important context for the presentation today is that it's if I'm a healthcare provider, I'm thinking, well, I'm already not making all that much money. If I'm a small hospital, for example, how could I possibly learn to compete in this kind of world? I've got endless deep pockets in Amazon coming to try to compete with at least a portion of my business or my patient community. Just kind of put that aside for right now and just think about that kind of context. I think that is sort of the crux of the issue of what we're trying to cover in the content today. How do I find room to invest in things and do it in a smart enough way that I can compete in kind of a different marketplace? So the second video is actually very similar. It's Walmart, a little different take on it. I'll do my commentary maybe before the video on this one. I've used this one a couple of times before in other presentations, and I tell people, first of all, I'm not ready for Walmart and healthcare. I can tell you that personally. But I will say this, so I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, relatively, I live in Fargo now, relatively urban setting. And, Walmart wasn't really a big thing when I was young. They were kind of just starting to come into bigger cities, that kind of thing. But Walmart knows rural America. So if you're a healthcare provider out there and you're thinking, well, yeah, Walmart's never going to matter to me, they're never going to compete, I would say at least suggest that they definitely understand how to service rural America. They've kind of become the everything store. There's a lot of parallels to Amazon in this example from a video or from a healthcare delivery perspective. And they're coming at it from a little different angle. But if you pay close attention in the video, you'll see all the technology that enables this. And I think again, it gets to the same crux of the issue of how do I invest and to be able to compete with these kinds of things that are happening in the marketplace. So I'm gonna play some video on that. So I promise you, it's not intended to be an ad for Walmart Health. They're only in a couple markets. I think last I knew it was somewhere in Arkansas and Texas. They have 2 of these going right now. The thing here that's interesting is they're quite literally trying to become the Walmart of healthcare. So they're trying to consolidate all the types of specialties. You saw hearing, you saw 3D printed crowns, all dental work, all under kind of one umbrella. So they're definitely coming at the market very differently. But again, if you look at the technology behind it, it's all towards giving a little bit different and better patient experience. So I think those are 2 really good examples that kind of set the stage for, I'm just going to say the market in general. All right, so now with kind of that stage set, hopefully, and people understand what we're talking about, which is this disruption that's happening in the marketplace, and how do you kind of respond and budget to deal with that kind of marketplace. So the graphic here is intended to show a relatively, I'll say, straightforward kind of message, which is your business strategy should drive your technology investment. I always say that's one of those things that's kind of hard to argue with. It's sort of everything that's sort of good in life, if you will, in business. It's relatively straightforward concept or idea. In practice, it's a little bit more difficult to deliver, but think of it as you have this kind of continuous cycle going on, which is I've got to establish my business strategies. So hopefully you all have some level of a leadership team that's doing this type of thing. That's kind of the anchor point. So if you say, where am I going to start with these investments? I want to start with what are we trying to accomplish as a business? When we get to the process at the end, we'll talk a bit about kind of the building the process into making this link happen. Then from a technologist perspective, it's much easier to say, okay, here are the goals of the business. We're trying to get more efficient. We're trying to grow. We're trying to reduce our risk, whatever it might be, whatever our goals are. Now I kind of know where I can go invest. And that leads to this, the term you'll hear a lot of technology people say is digital transformation. In a couple other presentations, I try to define this. That's one of those words, if I with a live audience, I'll ask how many people know what this means. And typically less than 10% of people raise their hand. But the definition is really, in my mind, mostly centered around new and different business models. So if you think of how you do business today versus how you could do it in the future with different technology available to your customers and your constituents, you can have a very large impact typically, and quite literally completely transform, build a new business on top of the technology. So this is that maturity model that I described earlier, just at the start. We kind of view it around these kind of 5 categories. You've got kind of awareness, learning, competing, winning, and transforming. Awareness is relatively speaking, I'll say, straightforward. People kind of know that this is going on. You're at a point now where the Amazon example that I gave, whether you know about healthcare or not, you definitely view them as there's all of this technology potential, I'll say, kind of out in the marketplace. I know that it's there, but I have kind of a stable business model today. I'm building houses, I'm a retailer, I'm a healthcare, whatever it is, the model's relatively stable. I haven't really felt an urgent need to address that yet. I've got what in technology terms we would say are legacy systems and processes. So I've got a very clear way that I do things, kind of I've done it that way for a while. I don't see a big need to change. But then the same token, I have a little bit of chaos. So I mentioned that I've kind of transitioned into our data analytics practice at Bailey. And one of the things we see from clients all the time is, I don't need another dashboard. I got data coming all over the place. How do I kind of wrangle it and get value out of it? You kind of have that type of chaos. I've got systems maybe that don't meet our current needs. They were put in a long time ago. They met our needs then, and now they've changed or capabilities have changed. So you have a little bit of this sort of chaos going on. As a general rule, the business result here is I've got some growth, I'm profitable, I'm pretty consistent with what's happening in my industry. The next step up is we've labeled it learning, which is I would say you have kind of pockets of this digital success. I've done something in one of my departments. A really good example is I've put in a CRM, customer relationship management, or a CRM system. So I've gotten good at managing relationships with my customer, but maybe I don't have that linked to other processes in my business. I've got some limited amount of automation. I can attract the right kind of, we always say digital native talent. So think people who are used to doing things in an electronic way, that type of thing. But maybe I'm not coordinated in my investment. I'm doing it more at a departmental level. The result here is a little bit of uneven growth and profitability. You'll start to see some maybe not related to business cycles of kind of up and down in growth and profitability of the business. By the way, I would say 80–90% of our clients are in one of those first two buckets. They're kind of there, and that's where they've been, and they really aren't necessarily thinking about how do I kind of move up a little. So now is where kind of the real opportunity is, if you think about that. If most people are in those categories, what's the opportunity that's in front of you? I would say that it's in these next three categories. Competing, which is now I've really started to get to the point where I use technology and data, all the kind of assets to go compete and win in the marketplace. So we'll quite often talk about data analytics solutions where the goal is to help you make better decisions and make them faster. So if you can do that, what does that mean from a competitive perspective for you in the marketplace? The attributes here are data literate. I've got a kind of a digital customer experience. For those of you who are Ide Bailey clients, I know at least maybe not everybody, but a lot of you are. You think about what we're doing or trying to do with Ide Bailey Connector, the client portal, your ability to connect, interact with us electronically. That's the beginnings of something like that. You've got widespread automation in place. So I'm really taking advantage of the fact that I can automate tasks that maybe were once manual. I'm not necessarily talking robots in factories. This could be as simple as automating electronic tasks. You can do something called robotic process automation. I actually love the notion of using technology to compete bigger. So I think one of the things that's really interesting is your business can look and feel much bigger to the marketplace with appropriate use of technology. I think that's a unique opportunity that's available today that maybe wasn't 20 or 30 years ago. The result here is you typically start to see margins expand, you start to see growth accelerate, a couple of those kinds of things. Winning, next level, I'm going to go a little bit quicker here now. Not a lot of clients are up in these categories. I don't think yet a lot of them are striving to get there. I would say you typically, the result here is you have industry leading financial performance. You're growing your profitability, you're taking market share from competitors. This is where you've really found a way to embed technology into the transformation of the business. Then that last category, transforming, is mostly future stuff. I kind of have a view that there's always nice to have this unattainable goal. Like I've always got something to strive for. You always want to get a little bit better. So this is, I think of things like in the data world, we'd say artificial intelligence, machine learning. I've got radically more efficient labor structures. I've found a way to dramatically reduce my labor needs in my particular industry or business. And the result here is you're dominating. You're taking market share in a big way. You're creating new markets and business models. You're kind of that thought leader. This is kind of Amazon in my mind. Really quick, we view this transformation as kind of a formula. So business transformation plus technology investment and that culture and people change are what it takes to deliver on the promise of transformation. The other thing I think that's important here is to think of this as somewhat of an iterative delivery process. So everything I talk about, think back to that circle that says, look, I'm going to continue to kind of do this on an ongoing basis. I think that's the important part of the content here. Okay, really quick on some trends. I think it's important to think to understand what's kind of going on, I'll say, in the market at large. I picked a really simple one here, but the comments to the right here on what we're looking at, you really need to find those kind of unstoppable trends in the industry. And the reason is that most of you are not working for a huge organization where you're going to go, quote, invent something new. It's going to be the application of a technology to your business and your clients that matter. The thing that's interesting here, I picked cloud, and I know not necessarily a technical audience, but cloud versus on-premise. I think people generally understand that notion today. And if you look at where the revenue is going, and I can tell you with 100% certainty, that's where the R&D dollars are going too. If you're trying to do something innovative and new out of kind of traditional on-premise older technologies, the dollars aren't there, meaning the new innovative things that we're trying to do with modern technology, modern thoughts, they're not being invested there. So clearly you need to find what's unique about you, but I think the message here is find those things that are attracting investment dollars in the technology field, and that's more than likely where you're going to find the things that will support those kind of strategic goals of your organization. Our second kind of general trend relates to priorities and where IT dollars are going. So who's where does a CIO, Chief Information Officer, or a CEO, where do they see the technology investments going within the organization? These are more technical categories versus kind of the macro trend of cloud versus on-premise. The art here is, as it says on the side, is finding those investments that connect what's your organization's goals with what's possible technically. The things to think about here, though, I think are, again, not that you should necessarily just follow others. These are generally speaking indications of things that are happening in the marketplace that are I'm gonna say relevant, that are relevant to client needs. So a couple examples, you can certainly improve our hybrid work capabilities. If you were to ask 5 years ago, was that one on the list? In fact, it says it on here in 2021. It really wasn't. It's a new thing today. You have that capability. You can imagine how important that is to many organizations, IBLE included. I tell people all the time, I walked out the door in March 2020 with my laptop and my phone and everything's on it. And it was very fortuitous. We had implemented some technologies that allowed us to do this. I didn't walk back in for a couple, 3 months. That's possible because we invested in the right technologies and doing the right things. So I think the thing here is take a research study like this, and there are plenty of them out there. I just picked a couple for our presentation today, and find those areas where those priorities map to your business priorities. The survey thing, the 86, 84, and 76%, I think is interesting too. This is kind of that your technology leader needs to kind of bridge the gap between business and technology. You're starting to see that a little more digital and innovation focused. It's getting a little bit deeper into the industry. So if you think of the early days of major technology investments, it was, I'm going to put in a general ledger, I'm going to put in timekeeping system. They were relatively straightforward functions. Now, those systems are getting embedded much more deeply in the organization and into its day-to-day operations versus just executing on a lot of financial transactions typically. So that's what those are kind of referring to, and I think it's an indication of a healthy organization when I start to think of technology that way. The last kind of trend one is around industry. But again, I always do this with a caveat. You could find lots of surveys here that show this all over the map, but this is where are people in various industries, what percentage of their revenue are they spending on technology? This tells you, I would say, whether you have the potential or whether you've got room. So back to the notion of how do you find room in the budget? The first thing is understand where am I at relative to my peers. Again, your goal isn't to necessarily get to your peers, but I think the goal is to understand where they're invested, figure out whether you've got kind of the room or not. You'll see that this is all over the map. Clients will oftentimes ask us this question, what's the right percentage? And I always say there is no right percentage. There's not one right answer here. The thing is to find the right balance for you. The other one is that honestly, if you were getting a return, you'd spend much higher than this. So if you were seeing a direct return on your technology investments, you'd spend it all day long in your business, whether it's within the norms of the industry or not. So to this notion of how do you find room in your budget? I think there's a few questions you want to kind of ask yourselves and your team about. And the first one is, how much of my IT budget goes towards operations? And I can kind of preemptively answer that question. I would say that for 70, 80% of organizations, this is a very, very high percentage of the budget. When I say very high percent, probably 80, 90, 100%. I'm not really doing anything new. It's kind of status quo. So the reason that's important is if you think about it, if I'm just, as I say here, keeping the lights on, if I'm just taking and running what I'm doing today, I'm replacing people's computers, server gets old, I replace it, something else gets old, I replace it. How much have you really moved the organization forward, the business forward from a capabilities perspective? And typically, not very much. In fact, you might have almost even gone backwards. You certainly aren't doing the kind of innovation that we're suggesting is important here. The corollary to that is how much of it goes towards innovation. And the next slide, we kind of show that tug of war a little bit that says, well, what things are categorized as what? But the art here is you want to shift as much of it to this category as you can. And again, that's what we'll talk a little bit about some techniques that I can help do that a little bit later. And then I think the other one to ask yourself is my industry at risk of just being disrupted already? So if I'm in healthcare, if I'm watching that Amazon and that Walmart, or that Amazon and that Walmart video, I look at that as a disruption that's happening in my industry. I wouldn't be afraid of it. I actually think for many clients it's an opportunity. But when you look at that, you say, if you look at your industry and say what's going on here, and you see those things, that's probably an opportunity to change how you budget and where you invest your dollars. Okay, so as I said earlier, every organization experiences this natural kind of tug of war between operational IT spending and strategic IT spending, and they're kind of competing for these limited resources. So to kind of articulate those two things, the first one is I call operational spending, operational IT spending. I would say that those are keeping your current your support, your current operations. It's kind of that keeping the lights on notion. It's upgrading. So I've got a piece of software, I go through an upgrade cycle. Now I have the new version that's supported and maybe more secure or whatever it might be. And I'm at best getting, I'll call it incremental improvements here. On the strategic or innovation IT spending side, I'm 100% focused on new capabilities. This is the Amazon video. This is how am I going to do telehealth? It's going to be how am I going to handle healthcare in a mobile world with an application for better patient engagement is the term you'll hear frequently. These are investments that map directly to those kind of IT goals, and those business goals and strategies that we talked about at the outset. So whatever you're trying to accomplish from a business perspective, these are those IT investments that you need to think of as, I'm going to go invest the dollars, I'm going to get a long-term return. It's not about running the business today. It's not about getting just a tiny bit more efficient or having a little new capability. This is about mapping that investment directly to the goals that we have as an organization. So again, finding room in the budget. Where do you start is kind of oftentimes the question. I think the first thing you do is optimize that operational IT investment, and your goal there is reduce your baseline spending to free up resources. So I think I've said that a couple of different ways now. I think it's useful or helpful to give a couple of examples. I won't venture to say a percentage, but a lot of people on the call are probably still running on what I call as a relatively traditional IT environment. The server gets old, I replace it, I invest in data center technologies, I invest in the networking technologies that support it, and the backups, and all these other things that go with it. And kind of the modern way to do this is what we would say in the cloud from an IT perspective. But one of the ways that I optimize is I take things that are taking time and resources and capital today, and I push it somewhere else where they're getting massively more efficient on it. A really common example people can maybe relate to, if you've taken your email from how that used to work to Office 365, that's now become a service. I pay a few dollars a month per user, and I've freed up capital resources from what it took to run email and collaboration platforms on premise. I've freed up people's time. I've freed up all of those resources to now redeploy somewhere else. I can guarantee you that in an organization of any size, small or large, I'm doing what I would say are collaboration and communications more efficiently today than I was 5 years ago. There's no question those have become quite literally like a utility. So that I say competitive tool versus utility. Those have become quite literally a utility. I just turn them on and they work, and I don't really need to do much to administer them anymore. Second step is this alignment and prioritization. So I have a little bit on kind of that process coming up here too in the content, but this is investing where you get the biggest return. So understand with my goals, and we have kind of a little bit of a scenario we're going to walk through at the closing part of the presentation around mapping your technology investments and those to those business priorities. But the thing here is that I think you want to say, invest where you're going to get the biggest return. So one of the things I think you hear a lot of is, I can't imagine even finding the budget. I don't know where I would start. I think the thing here is that sometimes the most important thing is to start. Pick something, start something small. If you go back up to the maturity model. If you're down in this category, pick something that's going to just advance the ball a little bit towards kind of the learning and the competing category. Pick a department, pick a function, those kind of things. One of the ways I describe these continuum types of things is there's generally no replacement for the journey, right? So there's no replacement for going through the process of maturing your organization and getting better on a continuum like this. You can't just go from awareness to transformation. You kind of have to go through the organizational learning and processes to get there. There's just no replacement for the knowledge and culture that an organization gains by going through that process. So the idea here is now we've figured out where we're going to invest it. And then the third one is really just redeploy those dollars into something innovative. If you were spending $1 million keeping the lights on, running your IT budget, you then challenged everything you did and you got it down to $750,000. You now have, in my mind, $250,000 to go invest and get a return and innovate and do the things that you want to do. This is a process, in my mind, that takes IT spending from a utility to a competitive asset. This is how you turn IT into something that allows you to compete in the marketplace and be more successful as a business. So along those same lines, we talk about every business wanting to do three things. This is actually from a couple of business books over the years. It's not, I'll say, proprietary or unique to us. But I think sometimes we get away from this when we think about where we're going to invest in technology. All businesses, all organizations really want three things out of their technology investment, and really not just technology, on people, any other investment they make. They want to increase revenue, they want to reduce costs, and they want to reduce risk. So if you think about those principles as you dive into a process of budgeting for technology, I think that those kind of guiding principles will serve you well. So an increasing revenue is how can you use technology to help increase revenue in this case. I think examples are, I'm going to invest in a customer relationship management system, we would say a CRM system, and that's going to help me understand my customers better. I'm going to drive sales processes. I'm going to drive kind of a digital interaction with customers that meets their experience or expectations, today, and just generally drives a better experience. That's probably an opportunity to do things in a kind of better, more modern way than we've typically seen with legacy processes. Second example here would be potentially monetizing data. So a lot of organizations have figured out how to take the data that they collect in their systems, and they've said, I'm going to figure out a way to either sell it, or I'm going to figure out a way to have it increase sales. I'm going to figure out a way to have it drive the growth of the organization. This was my notion I mentioned earlier, of helping clients make better decisions and make them faster. There's typically an opportunity here to be utilizing the data you have in your organization more effectively to drive revenue growth in almost every organization, I would say. On the reduced cost front, I would say that there are a couple of key things here. How are we going to reduce costs? Well, we're going to invest in process automation. I mentioned that earlier. So this is, I'm going to find a technology that takes a task that I'm doing today that is relatively mundane, simple, repetitive, those kind of things. The technology, for those interested, it's called robotic process automation, or RPA. But there's almost always an opportunity that says, I'm going to try to reduce costs. Second one would be more in a manufacturing setting. I'm going to automate things in my manufacturing plant, my processes. Big investments, maybe a long-term return, but almost always there's a chance to take technology and reduce costs. I actually think reducing risk is a particularly timely point in our current kind of point in technology history, I'll say. As we take more and more of the business and digitize it and move it down this path, it becomes more and more important that I secure my systems, my data, my business. So I think that you can't, while it's tempting to always do the things that are going to increase revenue and reduce costs, those are kind of the more exciting things, I'll say, for a lot of people, because you can see a direct return on the top line or the bottom line of your profit and loss statement. There is this element that says I also need to protect it. I would say more art than science. But if you were to talk to our cybersecurity folks, they would tell you, hey, the thing is, set aside a certain percentage of your budget for this because it's critical. And they're not wrong. It's 100% right. I mentioned I do a fair bit of work in healthcare. It amazes me how little we spend trying to protect the data that we have in healthcare as an industry compared to, for example, a bank. And the reality is the data that a healthcare organization has is more valuable than what a bank has. Banks have to, by regulation, have to test for security on a regular basis, all those kind of things. Almost every other industry should be doing something similar. So these are intended to be, as it says, 3 key principles. So if we're trying to decide what to do in budgeting, following these 3 principles, ask yourself these questions every single time when you're deciding where to deploy capital and resources. So now we're going to wrap up with kind of the phases in a budgeting process. We're going to go through sort of 4 things. We're going to go through business strategy. This is not really the focus of our session, but we have to have something to kind of anchor off of. So we're going to talk just a little bit in our example about a kind of outcome of a business strategy, if you will. We'll talk a little bit about an envisioning process. I think that most organizations could benefit from stepping back and just saying, well, what's possible, right? From a thought leadership perspective, what can we do that maybe we couldn't have done 5 years ago? That Amazon video 5 or 10 years ago, it wasn't possible technically, but it is now. So someone's going to look at it and say, oh, there's a little different way I can do these things now. You know, another interesting one in healthcare is just if you think of the number of people wearing an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, we now have the opportunity to collect an awful lot of information and pump it into someone's electronic health record. That's an interesting prospect. I have a client we're talking to that does the remote monitoring, and the amount of data that they could collect and get into a patient's health record is truly mind-boggling. It can have a huge impact on outcomes and therefore revenue in healthcare because of the kind of the payment models, the way those are changing. Third part of the process, third phase, is to prioritize. And then the fourth one is just measure the impact and the return of your investments. I think sometimes we make an investment and we blindly get on the path. You'll see a little bit in that envision process. We think that's a little bit iterative. You do need to think about continually monitoring that, because I think you might need to correct a little bit while you're already down the path. Rarely do you just kind of get this nailed right out of the gate. So phase 1, we would say, is the business strategy. This is kind of the foundation that you're going to build all of this off of. Define your business goals and objectives. What are we trying to accomplish for? You can really insert timeline. And for this example, I said 3 to 5 years. What are we trying to do in the next 3 to 5 years as an organization? And then organize those strategies into, I'm saying, key pillars, whatever you want to call them. There's lots of great methodologies out there on kind of business strategy. What we're saying in this kind of example would be that if you're trying to grow your business, you want to focus on improving customer service, you want to develop your people, and you want to get more efficient. So those would be 4 relatively common, I'll say, kind of pillars or strategic objectives over a short-term horizon or a midterm horizon like this. So the specific examples or goals under growth that I put in here, and again, they're relatively made up for just the discussion purposes today, would be, I'm trying to increase my revenue 30% over the next 3 to 5 years. Probably a lofty goal for some organizations. I'm trying to expand into maybe 3 new markets. So if I'm going to invest in a technology system, how is it going to help me get into 3 new markets? Customer service, I'm trying to improve something called my Net Promoter Score. This is kind of do people support and refer your business? I'm trying to improve my call response time. And then on the people development side of things, I want to start thinking about succession planning. By the way, some of these, maybe there's not a lot of technology investment that's relevant, but I think it's still important to consider it. I want to do a sales development program, so I want to develop my salespeople to be more effective. And then on efficiency, I'm just trying to reduce my labor cost. Critical, important for everybody. Most businesses today on this phone, or most organizations on this call, if you could reduce your labor cost by 5%, all things being equal, you'd take that deal in the current climate. And I'm also trying to reduce my raw materials cost. So those are kind of hypothetical and 4 pillars, 8 specific kind of strategic objectives of the organization. Now we're saying you've established that, you should step back and do this, what is possible, right? So ask your organization or ask your teams a little bit of that. We would say, what if, right? What if we did things a little bit differently? Challenge the notion of the patient has to walk into the clinic and say, hey, what if I did that all via telehealth? Or what if I started with telehealth and then deployed a home health nurse for some of those things, are examples of that. But I think it's helpful to step back and kind of do almost some research and say, where are we really trying to go? So we're kind of skipping from this build phase to envision in this diagram and say, I'm trying to imagine and design the future. And then I'm kind of going back and forth between that and building. So those are the next phases. But the idea being that I'm sort of teetering back and forth here and adjusting accordingly based on what my new vision is.
All right, we did have one question that came in, and it says, how do you keep a channel open for organic IT improvements that come from employees to communicate improvements to management?
So if I think I understand that right, so how do you kind of capture the innovation of your people? I'll say that I would, excuse me, I'd put some of that into the kind of employee experience, something along those lines. I'll give you an example that we have at iBailey in some of our internal systems. We have kind of an idea generation platform or capability where people have the ability to submit ideas and say, hey, I'm an auditor. Here's how I think we can improve audits for banks or whatever the specific opportunity is. So I think some of it needs to be give people a platform to voice those ideas and kind of capture that innovation of your team. That's kind of strategy one. The other one is I think you can get much more intentional about it. I'm just going to pick examples from iBailey that we do. I think they're reasonably successful. We have a program where we take auditors and tax people and we rotate them around the Kona Exchange into other parts of the firm. So in my area, data analytics, we have people who are actually right now wrapping this up, and they've generated incredible ideas to improve their kind of function through our use of technology. So I think there's two strategies there. Number one, give people a forum, right? So give them a place to speak up and say, here are my ideas for improving technology, and kind of make their case. Most of them want to be a part of kind of something successful in doing that type of work. And then so that's kind of I would say the platform, give them a forum or a platform to sort of voice those things. And the second one is more intentional programs. I think that we sometimes get everybody stuck in their role and their rep, and they do their thing, and that's great. And they probably do a great job at it. But we've found that you can, by being very intentional about mixing things up a little bit, you can generate an awful lot of innovative thinking. So those are probably the two things I would say to that. Okay, we'll go back to the prepared content then. So phase 3 is prioritize. And if you recall, we talked about trying to quantify and measure the benefits here. Very much, I would say, consider people, process, and technology. So don't think of these as all the benefits need to be in the technology side. I think you're going to have some cases where that's really simple, where it's foundational things, capitalize that and move to the cloud, something like that. But I think there are also cases where it's going to take some judgment to understand the return. So what I did here is I took our 4 in yellow, our 4 kind of pillars, if you will, for a business strategy. And I said, okay, what are some hypothetical initiatives? So we're doing some data analytics work. So this would be maybe data warehousing, it'd be reporting, those kinds of things. And what does that investment look like? And I kind of put that as medium on the scale. It's very different from organization to organization, but it's somewhere in the middle. So that's what the $2 signs is intended to indicate versus 1 and 3 of the other examples. That has, in my judgment, and I think you could get much more scientific about this, it just didn't necessarily work for an example in a webinar, but it has kind of a mid-level impact on growth. Looking at your data, making better decisions between financial statements, I can make a very strong case that I can support my growth initiatives with a technology like that. Customer service impact, I think, has the potential to be really high. If you think back to what we said were the goals on that earlier in the content, I'm trying to improve my net promoter score. I'm trying to improve response time. All of those things, much better insights. I could make a strong case that I have a high impact there. People, not so much. If you call it with succession planning and people development, I'm not sure data is the place I'm going to do that. really high on efficiencies, same kind of thing. I think you can have a very high level of impact there. And then you can kind of follow the other examples. CRM, definitely more tilted towards the growth. So if I'm trying to grow my business, if I can find a better way to interact with my customers, either more efficiently or more effectively, better yet, I think that you could justify a CRM implementation. And relatively speaking, I view that as probably a mid-level kind of investment. Process improvement efforts, maybe not a lot of effort. I think it's important to have something here that says, look, we're just going to go focus on either outside help or our own people making our processes more efficient. Probably not a huge impact on growth, but I could see medium on the other two in people and customer service, but really efficiency would be really clear. In my healthcare examples that I've given, we talk about remote care delivery implementations. So this is telehealth, potential for high impact on growth and high impact on efficiencies. If you think of how effectively the labor can be deployed in that kind of model at scale, it's probably a game changer in healthcare. By the way, I understand fully there's all kinds of reimbursement. I'm not the expert. I know there are other challenges around that if you're in the healthcare industry, but I do think from an example perspective, there's enormous potential there. What this little grid kind of tells you is that, boy, it was pretty easy to just quickly come up with those things that are going to help with our efficiency goal. Maybe somewhere in there is the low hanging fruit, right? Because you've got some things that are low investment and high return. The one that looks challenging is probably, it doesn't jump off the page, but I would probably say growth. Growth is probably the one where it's challenging, but I do have one kind of targeted mid-level investment that can have an impact. So one of the things that jumps off in these kind of discussions usually is, well, where do I start? I would start where I get the greatest return, just like every other investment you make. I think technology investments sometimes become maybe a bit too emotional. And the reality is that you start where you're going to get the greatest return, just like you do when you're deciding who you're going to hire, just like you would decide a change in a product or materials or location. Start with the same thing that says, where am I going to have the greatest return on my investment? This whole process to me is and this is one simple example. You can get much more detailed than this, but some disciplined process that says I've tied what I'm going to invest in to what I'm trying to accomplish from a business strategy perspective is probably one of the most important concepts of the discussion today. So the last phase, and then we'll move on to some Q&A, is to measure the impact and the return. So what I would say here, not surprisingly being sort of the data person, I'll say, is find some metrics that tell you whether you're having an impact. So you can look at your growth, and yeah, you can 100% equate it to technology, but if my revenue is growing, I've got new customers, whatever those metrics that indicate success, try and tie it back to those technology investments to the extent possible. With customer service, did my net promoter score, it's a great industry standard one you can go to. Did it improve? Did it not improve? Did my call response times improve? Hang up rates if it's a call center, those kinds of things. But pick some numbers that you can objectively look at and say, did we really accomplish what we were trying to accomplish here? Yeah, I can't always equate it 100% to the technology investment, but it's certainly at the very least anecdotal. And it tells you whether you need to make a correction. So if you think back to that envision process here, the 2 to 3, we're kind of showing, hey, sometimes you need to go back and forth here. You need to think about ways to correct your plan to get a little bit more in alignment. People development, turnover rate's a great example. You can always look at there. It's a really tough one, I suppose, right now. And then efficiency, you could be looking at your labor as a percent of the revenue to produce the good. What's your selling cost? That tells you whether you're developing your people effectively or not, as an example. But I think the key thing here is continually refine your vision. Go back to that envisioning process. Say, what does our future state look like? What are the initiatives to get us there? And then monitor whether you're getting a success and a return out of those investments. That is all of the prepared content. Did you have any more questions, Amy, or if others do, if you can put them into the Q&A?
All right, so we do have a few questions. All right, so the first question, what do you typically see for a percentage split in your IT budgeted between operations and larger transformation initiatives?
So I would say the first thing is there's no magic answer there. But I would say probably oftentimes in analytics, I say the trend is your friend, right? So you want to be trending down as a percentage on the operations. That's the kind of IT equivalent of getting efficient in the factory. So I would say that percentage, but maybe the more important thing is that I'm managing and driving that down to free up dollars. If you were an organization that could get 25-30% of your spending towards future initiatives, future capabilities, you're doing pretty well. I'd say leaders are probably close to half. Depends on where they're at in the maturity of the business would be a big cycle. So if I think I'm in a high growth, high opportunity business, I'm going to drive a higher percentage of that towards the innovation and a lower percentage to operating.
Okay. Next question here. What are some specific strategies for reducing your IT operating expenses?
So I think the best example I could think of there, I mentioned it a little bit during the presentation, would be to leverage those things that can be done as a service for you. I think we've kind of been trapped into feeling like I needed to build and do everything internally in my environment today. Now, a lot of software, a lot of systems can be just almost completely outsourced the operation of them. Believe it or not, in most of your organizations, the amount of time spent on something, the example I gave in the presentation, is something as simple as email and collaborations platforms. So things like Zoom and Teams and your email today and your calendaring, and the amount of time that went into administering that, not all that long ago, was quite substantial and has been cut pretty dramatically with things like Office 365 and making that kind of a cloud service. Same thing with a lot of major systems, ERP systems in the cloud, CRM in the cloud, all of those kinds of things. So I think that I would say leverage those things that can literally be run like a utility for you, and then you focus on the things that it frees up the time to focus on the things that are really a differentiator.
Okay, we have just a few more questions here. What should I do if my budgeted and investment capabilities are so limited?
I would say that I guess I would start with finding even a small investment to make. I know I'm just trying to contradict the question, but I think that just about everybody can do something. Freeing up the dollars. So free up the dollars. Don't try to save money with it. Necessarily find ways to redeploy. I would just say start small. That's a really simple answer. Maybe not what we're looking for, but start small and find an initial opportunity. Find a department. Find a user. Find however small you need to get it. But I would just say start small. You don't have to start with some dramatic change initiative like telehealth and healthcare. It could be, look, I want to improve a piece of software that I'm already using and get more value out of it.
Okay, this one goes back, I believe, to your maturity model that you're showing earlier on your slides. It says, how long does it take to move between the levels?
Yeah, I would say that the health and growth of your business is what answers that question. There's no magic answer that says I should go, one level a year. This is very much a subjective thing. You try to kind of plot yourself on here and say, here's where I'm at. Again, kind of like the analytics example, I would say that the trend is your friend. Are we doing things to try to get more mature in our use of technology is the most important thing. So there's no magic answer there. I think some organizations go very, very fast, try and do it in months or a couple of years. Other places, it's a decade-long kind of journey.
All right, we do have a few minutes left. If anyone has a question, go ahead, put that in the Q&A. Otherwise, John, any final words there?
Nope, I think that's all I have. Thank you very much for attending the webinar today. We really appreciate it. You found it informative.